Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined as always by my triple threat co host, Brett.
That's right, Alice. I'm a three-tool player or something. I don't know. I don't know what any of those words mean.
Sure. It has nothing to do with that. I was going to say trifecta, but that doesn't really make sense. Really, I just wanted to put 3 in there because we are on week 3 of the Delphi trial. And it's not going quite as long as we had feared, which is good, I think, for everybody. But we are 3 weeks deep into a trial that is not being televised and no recordings. And so we have been trying to bring you weekly updates at the end of the week of 5.5, 6-day trial days to fill you in on what's been going on, because I know there's a lot of interest and there's also a lot of high emotions because we are talking about the gruesome murder of 2 young girls, Libby and Abby.
And Alice, you make the point about the length of the trial. I've found that usually prosecutors, the government, understates how long their case is going to take, and defense attorneys almost always overstate. I mean, defense attorneys are like, well, Judge, we might call 100 witnesses. We could be here for weeks. And then, like, they call 2 people and rest. In this case, I think the prosecution finished a little bit ahead of time. The defense is still doing their thing, but I can't imagine they're going to go all week next week, particularly what we've seen so far. So I think we're going to have a verdict by the end of next week.
I think you're right. I absolutely think you're right. And part of the reason, just so you guys know, why the prosecution typically underestimates and the defense overestimates is this is why I think it typically is. The government obviously has the burden of proof. And so as the case is going on, no matter how much you prep your witnesses, it's never like a witness goes on and they just hit the 3 points you have to have them hit. It takes a while. People talk. It may take twice as long, 3 times as long as you think it does. You think it's going to take to get those 3 points out. But usually when you have a witness, you have this big map in your mind of all the elements you need to meet, as is your burden for the government. And that witness needs to hit those points before they get off. But people like to talk. People get confused. People may be prepped and still not say what you know they know. And so that's partly why the prosecution often understates. It's not that they're trying to minimize their case. It's that this is a live game, man. You don't know what's going to happen when that witness swears in and then is like sitting before a jury and judge.
And you also don't know how long cross is going to go, because defense attorneys always overestimate their case in chief, but they always underestimate cross. If a defense attorney says, Your Honor, I probably only have an hour of cross. Okay, you'll be here for 4. I mean, so that's the other thing. It's hard to know how long the defense is going to take, and
that's
a lot of times. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's a great point for that. The government typically is only thinking about their case in chief, not the cross-examination, not the sidebars, not the extra rulings, not people in the jury raising their hands and be like, I need a smoke break every 45 minutes. I'm not saying that's happening in this case, but when a juror asked for a bathroom break, like the whole courtroom drops it like it's hot. Like, yes, go to the bathroom. Which even if it's like 20 minutes after the last person went to the bathroom, you have to dismiss the entire jury because the whole jury has to be seated before you can present any evidence. And so that stuff often drags things out without the government taking it into consideration as well. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, and usually prosecutors' cross-examination is much shorter than defense attorneys, just because, number one, we don't do it as much, so we're not as good at it. But number 2, our case, we're building our own case. So our cross is usually very limited to fixing anything that's been broken and maybe making 1 or 2 points. Whereas really a defense attorney's entire case, I mean, they put on a case, but usually defense attorneys, I'll say this about defense attorneys. We sometimes talk about how like the CSI effect and all that and how unfair that is. And we're seeing some of that in this case. Defense attorneys also suffer from what the public expects. The public expects Perry Mason. They expect defense attorneys are going to put on this amazing case when it's their turn. And really, number 1, that's not their job. Number 2, it's not what they're good at. And number 3, you almost never see that. You just don't typically see a really powerful defense case because that's not what the trial is really all about. So you don't typically see that. And that's one reason I think cross-examination on defense witnesses, it just doesn't take as long.
It doesn't take as long. And also, I do think when the defense estimates their case, there's first of all, like hopefulness, like this case is going to go great for us. And then in response to whatever the witnesses say on the case in chief, we're going to be able to bring like 5 people in to rebut them. It's like, host brings eternal. But in reality, that's usually not going to be the case. And also, you don't want to estimate before the judge and before your client as well. Remember, your client is sitting in the courtroom next to you, charged with a very serious crime. And if they hear prosecution says 10 days, Your Honor, and then you come back, you're like, I don't know, 3 hours. Even if that's all the defense needs, you can imagine your client may think, what the heck? Only 3 hours? Like, do you even care about me? And so there's a level of displaying to your client and to their family members and to kind of just optically, oh, yeah, we have just as strong of a case, even though, again, the defense can put on nothing and still win. The burden is squarely on the government. Anyways, that's just a little bit of like inside baseball on why those estimations are the way they are. I don't think anyone's trying to, lie. It is just a reality of the way the burdens fall and also the way trial actually runs. So with all that, this was a busy week in Delphi. Again, we have not been sitting in on trials on the trial days because you have to get in line. My understanding is now people are lining up before the trial day is over for the next day. And so we have been reading all the reports, listening to all the different commentators who are waiting in line, getting in there. And this is our take, sitting back a week, not doing day by day, to give you what we think is happening in trial. But so far, the prosecution has rested this week, meaning that their case in chief is over, and then the defense has an opportunity to put on their case, and they have chosen to put on. I think 2 days of witnesses now. Saturday is a half day, 2, maybe 3 days. I've lost
2.5.
count. 2.5 days.
Well, 2 total because Saturday is a half day.
Right.
So yeah,
Because they started on a half day. And
Right.
here is something I want to say real quick. The defense does have to be very limber because you don't exactly know when your witnesses have to go. And you will see this, and we even face this as the prosecution when Brett and I go to trial. There's no dead time allowed. The court is not going to recess just because a witness finishes early or another witness doesn't come. So sometimes your witness order or who is going on the stand is based solely on who is available at that moment. So I only say that to say that happens more to the defense and the prosecution because they don't exactly know when their witnesses have to go. So there may be rhyme or reason to the order in which the defense is putting their witnesses on. It may also be that if you have a gap, sometimes the judge will say, well, then you must rest your case, defense. And that's a real threat.
And I don't want to just keep talking shop here, but these are all interesting things. There was one point, the press, and I think even Murder Sheet talked about this, where it seemed like Baldwin was just stalling for time. And I think some people were like, well, if he's done with his witness and doesn't have any other witnesses, why doesn't he just say, Your Honor, I don't have any more witnesses. Why don't we just end early today? The judge can say, call your next witness, counsel. Your Honor, I don't have a witness available. So are you resting? I mean, you can be put in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes judges will be like, great, early day, see you tomorrow. But that's always, whenever you have that situation where something happens and a witness isn't really available, it's nerve-wracking because judges can hold you to that. Like, we're here, call your next witness. If you don't have a witness available, congratulations, you're done with your case. So I think maybe you see that happen sometimes.
Yeah, that's happened to me and Brett before, and it is nerve-wracking. So with all that said, let's dive in because there were a lot of witnesses this week, and we're going to go back to still the prosecution's case in chief before they rested this week. So there was a DNA expert. I know a lot of us have been talking about, is there DNA? What DNA is there? What is happening here? Well, there were many different swabs. And to the extent any male DNA was found, because remember, we had the one hair strand that was familial and female, and they didn't do further testing because no female family member was a suspect. So to the extent any male DNA was found, it was relatively minuscule and not sufficient to test with our current technology. And we know that the girls were given rape kits and DNA on the external genitals, and under some of the girls, females were found, but there was no sign. Huh?
You said females. I think you
Did I say females?
You did.
I heard fingernails. Is this like really? This is like one of those out of body moments. I was
Remember,
like,
Alice is about to have a baby, so
fingernails.
give her a little, cut her some
We're
slack.
so sorry. We're recording this Saturday when we should be recording Sunday because I texted Brett earlier and I was like, look, I walked like 5 miles during Halloween. We might not make it to Sunday, so why don't we do it Saturday in case I don't make it? So sorry if I sound a little scattered because I definitely am. Okay, sorry. There was DNA on the external genitals and under some of the girls' fingernails, who are female, but it's fingernails. And there were no signs of sexual assault. It's possible, if not likely, that this DNA is actually transferred from someone else because obviously, if this is a sexual assault or fighting back, I think you would expect to see a lot more DNA, say, under the fingernails. If there were sexual assault, you'd expect to see a lot more DNA than what was actually found. And this transfer could be anything from laundry, sharing clothes. We've already seen some of this. If you wash clothes with other people in your house, that DNA can transfer. If you sit in the same car, you shed the same hairs, you use the same bathroom, you sit on the same couch, these sorts of things, especially if you live with family members, you can see that type of transfer. Now, there was a possible hit for semen, but no sperm and no male DNA. This confused me in the Robert Wong case, but it confuses me when I hear that here as well. But remember, these tests are prone to error because they're not actually looking for semen. They're looking for an element within semen, which can be an element found in something else. That's what I mean. I'm no doctor, but like the idea of semen without sperm or male DNA seems almost impossible, which probably means it's hitting on the element we find in semen, but it's not actually semen. Now, the hair in Abby's hand, which the defense made a lot of hay of, turned out to be, you can imagine who it is, Kelsey's, Libby's sister. Remember, Kelsey drove them there. She told Libby to take an extra sweatshirt because it was cold. They lived together. Their clothes washed together. There was one swab they took from the girls' clothes and found enough male DNA to get a profile. And they thought they had something, which was encouraging, but they put it in CODIS and everything. And unfortunately, it was later determined to be someone from the lab. So in other words, it was an error in testing. That person, while they were testing, got their own DNA on it. Contamination happens. People are people. And the reason they put all this on is everyone wants the CSI effect. Everyone wants DNA to just say, that's our killer, or he's not our killer because we have something else. And they say all this to show you you're not always going to have DNA. There's all these other elements at play. And they talk about the difficulties of recovering DNA, which is trying to debunk that CSI effect, especially when you're talking about exposure outdoors in an outdoor crime scene where there's water involved, leaves involved, etc. There was also so much blood that it's almost impossible to recover any touch DNA on their body, which, let's pause for a moment. I know that we're talking about scientific things. That's devastating. We as in the public, did not get to see these hundreds of crime scene photos, but my understanding is those who have seen it in the courtroom, it was incredibly gruesome, incredibly bloody. Just like any other water, the amount of blood, I'm not surprised at all that they couldn't really get any DNA. And remember, the girls' clothes were quite dirty. Now, this expert, of course, was cross-examined because this is like the defense's chance to be like, aha, you have nothing. You have nothing on my client. And they point out various cutting-edge technologies that might be able to help the trace amounts of DNA that were collected, but not enough to build a profile. And the witness noted that trying those tactics would destroy the evidence, and it was unlikely anything would come from it. And we've talked about this in our episodes with Othram, where if you can always consume a DNA sample, but when you have such small amounts and you know you're not going to get anything from it, then you are wasting that DNA sample and kind of foreclosing the opportunity to use the actual developed technology in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just make 3 points here. The first is they didn't find really any usable DNA from anybody. Obviously, somebody killed the girls for whatever reason, the various things Alice talked about. There's no recoverable DNA, and that's just a fact. And that's just something that the prosecution is going to have to overcome. Now, I will say, you would expect that if the girls were not killed by one person, but two people or an entire, coven of Odinists, there would be more likely to be some DNA than if you just have one person who's pretty covered up who kills the girls and sort of gets lucky. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this goes for podcasters, YouTubers, journalists, random people posting online. If you are out there suggesting that Kelsey or one of her family members is involved in this case, you are not a warrior for truth. You are not a sleuth. You're not some sort of open-minded person. You're an asshole, and you should be ashamed of yourself. That's the second thing. Third thing, and this one got me. Alice, we do this a lot. We're both in law enforcement. If true crime is to be believed, we spend, 75% of our time framing people. I mean, we do a lot of framing. And we get a lot of experience in it. And I would think the police have a lot of experience in it. And I'm really disappointed in the Delphi police and the ISP because they went to all that trouble to switch out the bullet when they realized it was Richard Allen. We learned that from the defense in their cross, that they switched out that bullet that they didn't film 365 days a year so they could frame Richard Allen. But somehow they forgot to just put some DNA on the evidence. How easy would it have been to just frame him that way? And yet they forgot. So I think I'm going to have to add this to our trainings we do with law enforcement, that from now on, when you do your framing, make sure you include some DNA.
There's so few opportunities in life where you actually catch me off guard. That was one of it. I'm sorry. I hope you heard that because I was laughing.
And of course, I'm not serious. But once again, if you're out there thinking this is some sort of conspiracy, it is as most conspiracies are. It's a very strange conspiracy where the framing element is one that is controversial and can be attacked, and that jurors don't know a lot about. When you could have just framed with DNA, which everybody knows about, and which is like a slam dunk, right? I mean, if Richard Allen's DNA had been found on the girls, I assume even his most ardent defenders would probably say he's guilty, though I'm sure some of them would say it was planted. But I think most people would say that. But the fact that you don't see that, I think, cuts against this notion that there's some sort of frame job going on here.
And let's be clear about what this witness is. In, I think, another world, another time, this witness would not be necessary because essentially this witness got on the stand and was like, I have nothing to add. The reason this witness is testifying is because everyone expects DNA to be so transferable, so collectible, and so easy to be able to build a profile of anybody. People truly think, and we find jurors who think this, someone walks into a room and they breathe, and all of a sudden there's like a perfect image of who is in the room right there. If you go into a room and you breathe, your entire DNA profile is there, and we'll be able to tell for all time that you've entered this room at this time and you weighed this much, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just not the truth. So this expert is truly to show the whole process of what it's like to collect DNA. And here's the thing. If in fact this scene has been tampered with by police, I don't think anyone's actually suggesting it. This is in the outdoors. You would find so much police DNA. The only male DNA they were able to build a profile of is contamination from the lab. And that's because that person actually handled the sample. You're not finding errant DNA everywhere of all the policemen there who were very sloppy in collecting DNA. The fact we don't find more like errant DNA shows you actually how careful they were, and still they couldn't collect DNA.
So let's talk about Let's talk about Major Patrick Cicero. He testified about the deaths of the girls, and this was some pretty difficult testimony. He was the same officer who testified at the 3-day hearing this summer. He did blood spatter analysis. It was very emotional. He talked about how the area where the girls were found is like a bowl or a depression, so the girls were kind of down in that. He talked about the blood stains on the trees, how they appeared to be from Libby's hand reaching out to the tree after she had already been attacked, sort of trying to stumble towards it, stabilize herself before she fell to the ground and died. There was a large pool of blood in front of the girls, which all of this just blows away this notion there wasn't a lot of blood at the scene. This was a very bloody scene. One of Libby's feet had blood on the bottom, which indicated that she walked on her own blood before she died, which I think also goes to the notion that this did happen there. There were many images of the girls' bodies that were shown, showing the flow of the blood, bloodstain patterns on their bodies. Libby was mobile for some of the attack and was likely sitting for one of the wounds. The blood on her hands had congealed and dried. Her face was covered in blood, but there was a break in it caused by a tear. There were smears of blood on her hands and wrists, which is also common because the instinct is to try and stop the flow of blood by putting your hands to your throat in a desperate attempt to save your life. It's likely that Libby was moved after her death, and was confirmed that given the location, the temperature, and the time of the year, it is not surprising. There was no predation and very few insects. It was also said that Libby was dressed when she died, given how much blood was on her clothes. So devastating testimony, but I think absolutely necessary and a reminder for everyone out there who treats this like a game. This is not a game. This is not a mystery to be solved. I mean, this is a horrific tragedy.
Yeah, we don't. Those images that I haven't even seen are seared in my mind, and we don't need to spend more time on it, except to know this: we are seeking justice for 2 brutal, brutal murders. There's just no other way to put it. And this is why the victims have to be at the center of everything. So, moving on to Richard Allen. The prosecution plays 2 October interviews with Richard Allen. This was the first time the jury really heard Richard Allen's voice. Remember, they heard the video from Libby's phone that captured the guys down the hill. And so now, during trial, Richard Allen doesn't speak. They're not supposed to. You just sit there. Now is kind of a moment of truth. They're going to hear Richard Allen's own voice. Does it sound like Bridge Guy? Now, we didn't hear it. None of us do because it's not broadcast to the public right now. The problem is that the voice is so enhanced and was only a few words long, so comparing them is difficult. Guys down the hill, very few words, lot of inflection. It was very difficult to hear if it was not enhanced. So once it's enhanced, if you've ever like touched up a photo, you know that touching things up just kind of blanches it, right? We listened to the murder sheet, and Kevin and Anya, the hosts of Murder Sheet, they said it sounded like Bridge Guy. They shared that they talked to other people in the courtroom who also agreed. I don't know. We didn't hear it ourselves. But in the video, Richard Allen talks about wandering around because he's looking at the fish since he likes to fish. And then he says that he sits on a bench for a while and then he leaves. He's very relaxed when he's talking to law enforcement. He says he's not going to be somebody's fall guy when they continue to ask questions about exactly where he was, what time, why he's doing these things. And as the conversation starts to get out of his realm of comfort, because he's there to tell his story, which is like looking at fish, looking at a stock ticker, no big deal, I leave. When the follow-up questions become more targeted and it's clear that they're trying to ask targeted questions to see if he's the murderer, he starts to get upset and they talk about searching his house. Then he starts getting very agitated. And this is something really interesting that we've heard from multiple reports in the Richard Allen interviews is when he thinks he's just talking, he's not being interrogated. Apparently, he's very relaxed and he's in control of the conversation. I think most of us would be relaxed when we're driving the narrative. But the second things get heated and more direct about the murder, he gets very agitated. I would say this is very normal. This is why you have good cop, bad cop all the time. People tend to say a lot of things when they think they're just talking to a friendly voice. But when they think they're being interrogated, even if you're not guilty, you start getting agitated. So when they talk about searching his house, Richard Allen says that he's not an angel and he doesn't want them looking at every website he's looked at. And most of us would probably have the same sentiment, to be honest. I don't want people looking at my search history or my house. And he says that he watches Dateline every week, but he repeatedly denies any involvement in Abby and Libby's murder. But throughout this entire interview, he never asks for a lawyer. But he repeatedly mentions talking to his wife. He wants to see his wife. He wants to talk to his wife. Where is she? And he also throws out there, he's like, I have like psychological issues. He says it himself. And he goes on to say he's thought about shooting himself, and he even put a gun in his mouth. Now, the police confront him with a picture of the person wearing the same clothes as he said he was wearing, the bridge guy clothes. And this is when he does the whole, if that picture, bridge guy, is taken on one of the girls' phones, then it wasn't me. And that's an interesting framing. He doesn't say, that picture's not me. He says, if that picture is taken on one of the girls' phones, then it's not me.
And, you know, this prosecution team is really good at building their case. You notice we've talked about this before. This came up with a previous witness. Well, they're repeating it for effect. You know, they're bringing out this discussion again, and the jury's getting to see it again because they really want to emphasize this, because it is a weird framing. And a lot of the things are unusual. You know, they talk about how they had the search, and they tell Alan everything they took. Talk about the guns, indoor ranges, going out shooting. This is when Holman talks about how, you know, he's a gun guy too. He's trying to build rapport. And he tells Richard Allen the lab has some questions. And he asks all the control questions we mentioned before, whether he ever loaned his gun out and his clothes out and everything else. And Allen says no. And he tells him that a bullet from his gun was at the crime scene. Allen says, okay. And then he laughs and says, I don't think so. He maintains his innocence. As we said before, Allen is good during his actual interrogations. At one point during a break, one of the defense attorneys is going to sort of say loudly, like, that's what an innocent man sounds like, which, of course, is not the way you should be deciding guilt or innocence, because people can lie convincingly, and they can lie convincingly to the police. And Alice and I have had this experience of seeing this. I'm sure you have too. You know, I thought about, I don't know if you guys remember the Mommy Dead and Dearest documentary about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And it starts off with the interrogation of her, the initial interrogation of her, where she's still acting like she has all these issues and, you know, she can't walk and all this stuff. And the police are confronting her. And initially, you know, you think, what's going on here? And this girl's obviously has all these issues. And then as soon as she realizes they've got her dead to rights, she just completely goes out of character and all of a sudden is admitting everything that happened. And that's the thing about these interrogations. People are able to steel themselves for them, to go in and know, you know, I'm going to, assuming he's lying, I'm going to lie, and I'm going to lie convincingly. And you see that a lot. And I think when you see these, if you're trying to decide if someone's guilty or innocent based on how you judge the things they say, we talk about this in basically every case we do. I think that's a mistake. I think you really need to resist doing that and think about the evidence that you're seeing, not the body language of the person while they're being interrogated. So, as we said, Kathy, his wife, comes up a lot, and Holman tells him, you know, Kathy said that she wanted to go look for the girls, and that Richard Allen said he didn't want her to go looking. And she also told them about his depression, and that had gotten worse since the murder. And this video also catches interactions between Richard Allen and Kathy. And it's this sort of, he's telling her, you know me, you know I couldn't have done this. I know you know I didn't do this. She's kind of whimpering and crying and talking softly. She says something along the lines of, you told me you weren't on the bridge, which obviously isn't true. He was on the bridge that day, whether you think he did it or not. She asks, how did a bullet from your gun get out there? What are we going to do? He says he didn't have his gun that day. He can't explain it. She asks about the witnesses. He tells her that she's not in any trouble, and all you have to do is ask an attorney, and they'll let you go. And at some point, he tells her, I'm not going to sit here and try and convince you that I'm innocent, though obviously he is doing that repeatedly, sort of telling her, you know, I didn't do this. You know, I didn't do this.
And of course, this is interesting again because he tells, we already heard this earlier. This is, again, very good of the prosecution to bring it out again after multiple days of testimony, that he tells his wife to get a lawyer, but he himself never asked for a lawyer. And he knows that if you ask for a lawyer, this questioning stops. So this is all really, really interesting, especially his communications with his wife, which he knows is being filmed as well. Is it Officer Gallipo? Gallipo?
I think it's Gallipo, yeah.
Gallipo. Okay.
I think it's Gallipo.
I think so. I mean, we can't hear it. We just hear other people say it. Yeah. All right. Next on the stand is Officer Gallipo. And he is there to testify about the conditions of Allen's confinement, because obviously we know that the defense is going to try and say that the confessions are because of the terrible conditions he's being held in. We already know this from the filings previously. And I don't think that's a bad tactic, by the way. That's why they're having this officer come and talk about what it's like to be in prison. And he says that Richard Allen gets recreational periods. He has a tablet with apps on it, so he has recreation. He has access to the outside world. He also mentions that Richard Allen is on suicide watch, though, because of statements he's made and erratic actions that he's done. And he continues to have visits with his wife, Kathy. And they also mention that he's able to do some of the things you typically wouldn't be able to do in this area. In other words, he's not being treated worse. But remember, it is jail. There are certain things they have to do. They can't just like let him do whatever he wants. Part of it for his own safety, because what you hear on TV is true. There are different levels of the totem pole in prison, and child molesters and child killers are the lowest on the totem pole. Like adult murderers, people who murder adults, will try to kill you and shiv you in jail if you kill children, because those are lines that criminals in like who are self-professed criminals say those are lines you don't cross. And so the fact that he is charged with one of the most notorious double homicides of 2 young girls in this area is not great for him for purposes of protection in prison. So keep that in mind. That is just a reality, and we will see that. That is true. That's not just us saying statistics say he's going to be targeted. We see that he is targeted by the other inmates. And so there have to be precautions taken for him. And then, of course, when you express self-harm, the jail has to do certain things to keep you under watch. And the more suicide watch you're under, the more restrictive your activities become for obvious reasons. Now, he did have suicide companions, which are like inmates who are basically buddies to like watch out for you. And these can be inmates or they're correctional officers, but they spend all their time with you. So they hear what you do, they're there for you, basically. And Officer Gallipo says that over time, Richard Allen gets more and more erratic. He starts doing things like ripping up his mail, defecating in his cell, washing his face in the toilet, and just acting in ways that are, you may say, crazy. And he also then said Richard Allen starts confessing on multiple occasions, and sometimes even in writing. They're not just words coming out of his mouth. In fact, Rick sends a note to the warden, and he says, I am ready to confess. I am ready to officially confess to killing Abby and Libby. And in another statement, he explained that he disposed of a box cutter in a dumpster. Box cutter is not something that was previously in discovery. Now, the cross-examination focused on how terrible the conditions were for Allen's confinement and how it drove him to confess. Again, I don't think it's a bad tactic. We knew that was going to be the case. But the problem is there were so many confessions by Allen, and they were heard not just by the guards, if you think there's some sort of conspiracy by the guards to frame him. They're heard by many other people, including recorded jail phone calls with his mom and his wife, and other inmates hear it. And he says things along these lines, and we don't hear all 60 plus confessions, I don't think. We hear enough of them to see just how specific they are. They're not general allegations of, yeah, I did it. He says things like, I killed those 2 girls, so I have to kill myself. He says, Dear Lord, forgive me for molesting Abby, Libby, and Kevin and Chris. We don't know who Kevin and Chris are, but we talk about this in some of our, like, when you evaluate truthfulness of confessions, we have people who tell us way more than we even know. And that is a sign of like trying to unburden their load and trying to make amends with like their creator, essentially. So take that with what you will. He also says, God, I'm so glad no one gave up on me after I killed Abby and Libby. And he says, I killed Abby and Libby all by myself. Nobody helped me.
And other times he's saying things like, Kathy, I did it. I'm guilty. Run, Kathy, run. I killed those 2 girls. I got what I deserve for what I did. I hope I burn in hell. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for killing them. Kill me. I'm sorry I killed those kids. I swear to God, I killed Abby and Libby. He would ask if he can confess to the warden and to Dr. Walla, who we're going to hear more from later, and a lot of apologies for killing the girls. And one thing we're going to learn is he had sort of a jailhouse conversion around this time. So some of this is related to his newfound Christianity. He told one guard that he had intended to rape the girls, but he panicked and ended up killing them instead. He told someone else that he killed the girls with a box cutter and threw it into a dumpster behind the CVS. Now, that he used the box cutter and disposed of it at CVS is a recurring theme. He told several people that. He told one guard the girls were screaming when he murdered them. It's actually interesting and maybe good for the defense because nobody heard any screaming. There's no evidence of that. Whether they were actually screaming or not, I don't know. You can imagine sort of what was happening at that time. And I think one thing that you should remember, even assuming Richard Allen did this, number one, you'll never know exactly how it went down. Number two, I don't know that Richard Allen knows exactly how it went down. I think this was a panicked situation. I think his memory is probably pretty cloudy. And we hear this a lot. You hear this a lot from people. Remember back to the case we spent like 10 weeks on. Leo Schofield.
Yeah.
Remember the Leo Schofield case? When Jeremy confesses, he actually says that, he remembers the first part and he remembers the knife. But once he starts stabbing Michelle, he goes into a rage. I mean, he basically, you've heard the phrase seeing red, right? And the next thing he remembers, basically, she's dead and there's blood all over the place. That is not uncommon. So to some extent, I think wanting sort of a coherent statement from Richard Allen that makes sense from A to B and includes everything that happened is not going to happen, whether he did this or not. So I think that's something that's important to remember.
And one thing to note about the he saying, is that even grammatically correct? Richard Allen saying that the girls were screaming. Remember where they're cut. Their throats are slit. You can imagine that maybe they did start to scream, and that's why they're cut where they are. If the killing was happening faster than he intended or didn't intend at all. So it's very possible that in his mind they are screaming, and that's precisely the type of injuries we see when someone's trying to silence someone, which is to cut their voice box. Okay, so some of these confessions actually come from Rosie's cross-examination. And this is because Rosie, or the defense, wants to draw out all of the confessions and show, like, you can't believe what he says. Because Richard Allen also said that he killed his family and his grandchildren, which obviously didn't happen. I don't think he has grandchildren, for one. I think he has one daughter. And this was smart of the prosecution on redirect, because you can imagine what the tactic is, okay, maybe he said, I killed those girls, but he also said, I killed everybody, like the Leo Schofield confessions. And so the prosecution then tries to show that when he said he killed his family and his grandchildren, he means this metaphorically. What he's saying is he's destroyed his family because of what he's done, which is also, I think, a pretty effective redirect of it. Now, most of these 60 confessions do come from the Westville facility, which was earlier in the case. So you can say maybe that was early on, maybe he was having some mental issues then, but there were also confessions from just this year, a few months ago, when Allen was moved to Wabash Valley, and the purpose of moving him was to give him better conditions. At the confession from this year, Allen said, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for killing those girls. Now, a lot of other things came out that we don't dig into, or the prosecution doesn't dig into. We don't know if it's true or not, but Allen also said that he molested his sister and that he may have molested his daughter. He doesn't remember whether he did or not. And he also claims that he was raped by his babysitter when he was 11 years old, and that he was molested by his grandfather. So if those are true, that's not the center of this case. Those could not be true, and it doesn't matter. But if anything, it may show kind of him coming to terms with why he did this horrific thing, which is like, I'm not in complete control of my own trauma.
And I know a lot of people want to know They want to know that. It's natural to want to know everything. It's natural to want to know why. One of the things that some people have said is, Richard Allen was this perfect angel before this. Why would he do this? Maybe he was. Maybe none of this is true. But if it is true, you see how this went. And it's very sort of stereotypical. It's very, just typical. It's pedestrian. You see this a lot with people who were abused when they were young, when they grow up. That not everybody who's abused when they're young becomes an abuser. Absolutely not. Some of them do. Some of them do things like molest their daughter or molest their sister or molest other people. He's mentioned other names, and a lot of times molestation moves up to rape, moves up to murder. It seems like, if Richard Allen's telling the truth, this was the escalation. It was supposed to be the escalation to rape. And he was going out there to rape those girls. And then things got out of hand and it turned into a murder. That's sort of the story he's telling. If that's true, this is not, I hate to put it this way, but this is not an extraordinary case. It's typical.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. After we heard the recaps of these confessions, I immediately texted Brett and I was like, the sad thing about this case is just how incredibly ordinary it is. You want it to not be ordinary. You want to think that there is some monster somewhere and this can never happen to any two girls going on a hike in the middle of the day in a public area. But this story, unfortunately, is a tale as old as time. And it sunk my heart like to the bottom of my stomach when I heard it, because I was like, this is so ordinary. This is so sad because it happens every single day. We've made a circus of this case, but unfortunately, this sounds just like another guy who had inclinations and he didn't think about anybody else. And here's the thing, I have my own theories about whether he intended to kill the girls or not, but you can imagine any person would go crazy if their intent was just to molest or rape, and then it ended in a double homicide. That was one of the most gruesome scenes you could ever see, with girls screaming, voice boxes cut, stumbling around in their own blood, grabbing to trees, trying to stand up. It would drive anyone mad. So I also have theories as to whether he's really mad or whether he's malingering in jail when he's doing things like defecating in his cell. But just that can drive anyone mad, whether they plan to do that or not. This is a horrific scene also for Richard Allen to process over and over.
And one thing I want to say, because one thing that a lot of people have wondered is, why has the defense not made this more about Richard Allen? Why haven't they talked more about Richard Allen, painted Richard Allen as a family man, et cetera, et cetera? And that's a good question. But remember the rules of evidence. The rules of evidence, we talked about Rule 404 and how Rule 404 says that, prior bad acts cannot be introduced to show that your actions in this case were in conformity with those prior acts. So you robbed a bank before, you're on trial for robbing a bank. We can't just say, well, you robbed a bank once, so you must have done it now. But if the defendant puts on their own character, presents their reputation for truthfulness, or their, one that you'll see sometimes in self-defense cases is their reputation for peacefulness. I'm a peaceful man. I would never act first, so this must have been self-defense. Well, if they do that, then the prosecution can turn around and start bringing in all this evidence of all the fights you got into, stuff that you wouldn't normally be able to bring in because it's Rule 404 stuff, because you've put it at issue. And so I kind of wonder if the defense is a little concerned that if they go too far into who Richard Allen was and how great a person he was, that might open the door to some of this other stuff. That is pure speculation. I have no idea if they have other stuff. But when you're wondering, why haven't they told us more about Richard Allen? That could be a potential reason.
And it could be that they don't have witnesses to testify, right? There's also going to be possible. A real gap if mother, wife, and daughter don't testify. I don't know that they refuse to testify, but you can imagine if you're going to talk about Richard Allen and any of those three don't testify, especially because we have them on recordings of him confessing to them, that could open up all of their conversations, could implicate marital privilege, and they may know a lot more that could be damaging than would help him. And they may just not want to create that hole for the jury and say, well, you're having all these, like, I don't know, CVS customers say he's a nice guy every time he hands over his pictures, but, like, what about the wife? What about the daughter he said he molested? So it is a difficult strategic decision of what you want to do. I have no idea why, but I do think the jury probably is wondering a bit why and who Richard Allen is.
So Allen also said, I'm not crazy. I'm only acting crazy. He told other inmates there that, which is the kind of thing you might say if you're crazy. So I don't know how much we can put into that. But the guards did testify that he would primarily act up around his lawyer visits, which I think is interesting. And I'm sorry, I will always believe that post conversion for a few months, he really did want to plead guilty. He wanted to admit what he did. He wanted to confess. He wanted to apologize to the family. He would meet with his lawyers, and his lawyers would say, Rick, you don't need to do that. We got a solid case. Just sit tight. We're going to get you through this. And they would sort of talk him out of it. But I think that sort of mental strain was one of the reasons he was having these issues. I mean, remember, some people want to say, well, look, he was having mental issues, so we can't trust the confessions. Maybe. Or maybe the confessions come from this immense stress he's under and the guilt he's feeling because of what he did. And I think that's consistent with this notion that he's having these issues when his lawyers come. And we're going to see some discussions he had with his family, which I think also go along with this notion of him sort of telling people close to him, I really want to do this. And him just continuously being sort of pushed, no, stay the course. So Monica Walla would testify. She was a big witness, controversial witness. She was treating Allen. There's no confidentiality in this circumstance. And some of y'all wonder that. It goes state by state issue in Indiana. You don't have any confidentiality. She did think he was faking some of his more extreme stuff. She thought he had mental health issues. But she noted things like he would do things like not eat, but he'd only skip 3 straight meals because he knew that if he skipped 4 meals, that would trigger a reaction from the prison. That's when they would start to take steps. And so that sort of thinking through sort of your craziness sort of indicates that maybe you're not crazy. And I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah. And so Dr. Walla testified to, she was a really big witness because he confessed in great detail to her. And because there is no privilege there, then she gets to repeat it all to the jury. So Richard Allen told Dr. Walla, I killed Abby and Libby and I'm sorry. And he's in tears when he says this, showing remorse, and that he killed them himself. There was nobody else. And he made sure that both girls were dead because he didn't want them to suffer. He intended to rape the girls only, but he had visited his parents the morning of the crime in Peru or Mexico, Indiana, and they invited him to lunch, but instead of going to lunch with his family, he gets a 6-pack and he drinks 3 of the beers and he goes to the trail. That's when he says he sees the girls and he follows them to the bridge. He wasn't sure how old they were. He said that they could have been anywhere between 11 and 19, but he didn't care. He mentions that he, quote, did something with his gun, which is when he lost the bullet. So he's aware of this bullet. Remember, he's been told of the bullet. He's explaining how he lost the bullet, or he thinks. And he said he was just going to rape the girls, but a white van drove by on the access road, and this freaked him out. This white van is a big one because it's a detail that he gives up himself. And this white van is located. It was owned by Brad Weber, who later confirmed that indeed at this time he did drive by in his van. Now, when he sees the van, Allen forces the girls across the creek and then he cuts the girls' throats. He then covers the girls' bodies with branches. And this is another fact not generally known until the defense issued its Odinist theory. But it's interesting that Allen says branches, since generally speaking, they have been described by others as sticks, even though they were indeed branches.
And yeah, I mean, we didn't know a lot about the condition of the girls until after the Odinist thing. Now, some people are going to say, well, Allen had access to Discovery, so maybe he read the Discovery. It seems like most of the time Allen was eating his Discovery, so I don't know how much he was actually reading it. But, maybe he did pour through Discovery before he ate it and saw that about the branches and included that. I will say this. if you assume he is having these mental issues, but nevertheless, despite the mental issues, and this is such a difficult needle to thread for the defense, because he has to be having mental issues that are causing him to confess. But he isn't just saying, I mean, he does sometimes just say, I killed the girls. He does say that sometimes. But other times, he's telling these very detailed chronological things with these little minor details in it. And so you got to believe that despite his mental illness, he's able to put together a false narrative with all these details in it that fit the facts of the crime. And that, to me, is very contradictory in a way. So I don't know how you mesh those two things, frankly.
And by the way, this confession that is told to Dr. Walla, she doesn't clean it up. It's actually told in a very coherent, streamlined manner. You don't always see that when you see someone in the midst of psychosis. They may have parts of truth, but it's usually hard to follow what they're saying. There's a lot, it's either out of order, things don't make sense. But the way, at least she testifies, he told her, is very methodical. You see exactly what's happening, and it's actually very clear-headed, more clear-headed than most confessions I've ever heard.
And obviously, you cannot overstate the white van part. I mean, it's absolutely damning. If you guys have followed any cases where there are false confessions, the thing that you'll always see from people who are false confessions experts, I'm going to take the West Memphis Three. What is the thing they say? Every single thing in the confession is something that was provided by the police. There's no details in the confession that only the murderer could know. The white van thing is, number one, a detail that only the murderer would know, but also it is such a minor detail. And it's difficult to imagine how Richard Allen could have made it up or how Dr. Walla could have fed it to him. To me, this is very similar, going back to the Leo Schofield case. This is very similar to Jeremy Scott's confession where he mentions throwing the car into park. And how, that's such a minor thing. If you're just making up a story of murdering somebody, you're including this very minor detail, but it also happens to be a very minor detail that solves something else about the case. In that case, why the car was damaged. In this case, why he was interrupted. And number two, a fact that he could not have known, a minor fact that he could not have known unless he was there. So even if you're trying to figure out a way where, despite the mental illness, well, maybe it's some of the medication he's taking is giving him enough lucidity to create this story. And he poured through discovery and he put this story together because he really wanted his confession to be convincing. Even if you're saying that, this tiny detail that apparently would not have been available to either person is inexplicable and it makes it really hard to discount the confessions, no matter what. Even if Richard Allen were stark raving mad, which, by the way, they never did any kind of competency examination on Richard Allen, by the way. I mean, we keep talking about his mental health issues, but they never did any of the things you would expect if that was the case. But even if it were true, even if he were stark raving mad, number one, that doesn't mean his confession isn't true, particularly when he is able to give you a detail he shouldn't otherwise have. So Allen also said that he was selfish, that he was a coward. He wanted to apologize to his family. He wished he could go back in time. He wanted to talk to his wife. So Walla set up a call. During this call, Allen asked his wife, and we're going to see these calls, if excuse me, Allen asked his wife if his family still loved him and if they would continue to love them. He told them, look, I might not have done everything I said, but I did kill Abby and Libby, and apparently this is one of those times where Kathy Allen hung up on him.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about this jailhouse conversion apparently he had. So apparently in March of 2023, Allen becomes a Christian while in jail, and it seems that many of his confessions are tied up with this conversion because he wanted forgiveness and he wanted to go to heaven, and he wanted to provide closure for the family. He also told Dr. Walla that he needed to let his wife go. He was doing things like sleeping with his Bible. And she testified that when Allen would confess, he had a smile on his face. This seems consistent with the trying to make amends so that he can, absolve himself of all these sins. And Dr. Walla also said that she told Richard Allen repeatedly, stop confessing. It's not good for your interests. Stop confessing to me. Stop confessing to everybody. But despite these warnings, Richard Allen continues to confess anyway.
So she also confirmed that around attorney visits or reviewing discovery is when his condition would decline significantly. She said that once he started receiving discovery materials, they switched from inmate companions to guards to avoid any inmates seeing the discovery, which is interesting because some of the inmates heard some of these confessions. So going back to the whole, how much does the discovery have to do with it? He would do weird things, sexual things. He would apparently masturbate in Walla's presence, which isn't great. He said he wanted to kill himself, but he was too much of a coward. And he also told her that he wanted to sign a confession and end it. And she said, look, you need to talk to your attorneys, not to me, about this.
So during cross-examination, the defense brings out that Dr. Walla was into true crime. Honestly, I saw more headlines about this than her actual substance of her testimony, but the substance of her testimony is so important. So,
which is good for the defense. I mean, if people are focusing on things other than him giving a detailed confession, that's a good thing.
Absolutely. And look, this line of questioning is great because, of course, what are they trying to paint her as? They're trying to paint her as someone who is really excited to be part of a real true crime case. They bring out that she accessed pre-sentence reports related to Keegan Klein, who is not part of this case, but obviously, as we know, pre-trial, there was talk about whether he was tied to this case or not. This is bad. She should not have done this. Pre-sentence reports are sealed and they're only available basically on like a need-to-know basis. We get them as attorneys for our own clients. I guess I can access other people's pre-sentence reports, but I really shouldn't access them unless I'm using them for court purposes. This is something that you can get fired for. And Dr. Walla did suffer some minor punishment for it. They basically move her to a different prison after she does this. It also comes out on cross-examination that she listens to podcasts about the Delphi murders, which it's like a list of podcasts that Rosie reads off. Yes, we were one of them. So were a lot of other podcasts who've ever covered Delphi. She said that she had an 1.5-hour commute. And so, like many people, she listens to podcasts. She would tell Richard Allen that she listened to podcasts and there were people out there who supported him. So don't lose hope. Now, the defense did not attempt to address how Allen could possibly have known about the van. So again, it's really good for Richard Allen if the news is only covering the fact that, Dr. Walla's listening to podcasts about Delphi and not focusing on the van. I don't know what hit with the jury. Hopefully the prosecution comes back around, and they've been hitting on the van. We're not in court. What's on the news is not necessarily what's being emphasized in court, but they don't even try to address this because I don't think they can. I think they would only dig themselves further into a hole. And you see this often. If you know you can't rebut something, sometimes it's safer to just stay the heck away from it, which is what they do here.
So Steve Mullins is recalled, and this is a really interesting recall. You may recall him. He is the person who talked about looking through the video, looking for traffic passing the trails. He finds this 2016 Ford Focus with the spoked rims, which was consistent with Richard Allen's. So a juror had actually asked him if he searched records to see how many other black 2016 Ford Focuses were registered in the area. And at the time, he had not. But as we always say, the investigation is ongoing. So he gets off the stand, and what does he do? He goes back and he looks into this. And he finds out that over 2 years, around here, 2016, 2017, there were 18 registered. When he narrowed it down to Carroll County, which is where Delphi is, there was exactly one 2016 black Ford Focus registered in the area, Richard Allen's. So on cross-examination, it was suggested that maybe somebody not from the area could have visited, which is 100% true, obviously true. But nevertheless, you got the registration and the spoked wheels. That's pretty powerful. And I got to think that juror is feeling really good about themselves. I mean, this was the way that juror is now like almost like an investigator, right? So that was smart of the prosecution to go back and do that.
Absolutely. So Brad Weber, the driver of that white van, testifies next. This is very good ordering, by the way, by the prosecution, because you have, Richard Allen's own words essentially bringing up the white van, and then bam, we found the white van. So he's the person who lives off of the access road near the crime scene, and he does indeed have a white van. He was working between 6 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. And on February 13th, the day of the abduction and murders, he clocked in at 5:41 a.m. and he clocks out at 2:02 p.m. And it takes 20 to 25 minutes to drive home. And he would have thus driven his white van down the access road at precisely the time Richard Allen later said a white van spooked him, and fits perfectly with all the times we have from the witnesses who see Bridge Guy, and also Richard Allen's own testimony of when he was here in the first instance before he tried to change the timeline of his time on the bridge. Baldwin cross-examines Weber, and he tries to challenge Weber's timeline. He says that he made a stop, and so that could have thrown the timeline off. But Weber says that's not correct, and Baldwin gets pretty upset and starts yelling at Weber. And he eventually gives him a subpoena to testify during the defense's case. Brad Weber is not an expert. He's not like a lackey for the prosecution. He's just some guy who has a time card that's like pretty clear what time he clocked in and clocked out, and he drives a white van. So it's a little unclear what the attack on Weber is going to be. I honestly, if we had to guess, it's probably because he talked to an investigator during a general canvass and said he worked on ATMs after work, while now he says he did that during work. Of course, this investigator pulled a lot more information than a general canvasser would, so I can imagine it's just jogging his memory better. But Weber doesn't come off, or at least from his testimony, it doesn't seem like he has some like dog in the fight, and he wouldn't know how to manipulate his timeline. We have the time card, we have his normal drive. He says, no, I normally just go from work straight home. And again, this seems to fit with the timeline that Richard Allen himself tells Dr. Walla.
So at one point, the defense wanted to play a call that they thought was favorable to them. Can't do that. It's hearsay. The prosecution did play calls, all of which were damning to Allen. And Murder Sheet talks about how striking Bridge Guy's voice was. And I will give you a quote from them. After hearing Allen's voice, they said, "This is the voice of Bridge Guy." We didn't hear it. I'm sure there were people in there who heard it and thought, doesn't sound anything like Bridge Guy. We'll just have to see what the jury thinks. They're the ones who are going to be listening to that. Just real quick, if you're the defense, you can't play a call that's favorable to you. And the reason that's hearsay is because your client is not a party opponent. And since they're not a party opponent, that exception doesn't apply. And if it's something that's good for you, it's not a statement against interest. So that exception doesn't apply. The prosecution can play the defendant's statements, but the defense can't. This actually came up, you may recall, in the Murdaugh case. So, more hearsay lessons for everybody. Okay. So now we're at the calls portion. And so we've heard, suicide companions. We've heard guards. We've heard Dr. Walla, but now the jury is actually hearing these confessions, or they are hearing confessions for themselves. So we'll just go through some of them. We are repeating to you, basically, listen to what Murder Sheet said about this, read a bunch of what other people said about this, and tried to come up with what sounded like the best the best transcript. This is the ultimate game of telephone. Probably going to get some words wrong. You'll get the gist. The jury heard the calls, so good for them. Maybe one day we'll all be able to hear the calls. Probably will after the trial's over. All this evidence, anything that's not sensitive, like pictures of the girls, that kind of thing, will probably be available, and you'll get to listen to all these calls on the inevitable Netflix special, which I'm sure will be coming in the next year or so. So November 14th, 2022. This is obviously very early in this process. I think Allen was arrested in like October of 2022. So this is 2 weeks or so after the arrest. He's talking to his wife. He and his wife are crying. He says something: "If this becomes too much for you, call the detectives and I will tell them everything they want to." And then people disagree on what this was, either no or hear. Some people think that's significant. I actually don't think that's significant. I mean, I guess no is more like he's telling them what he did, whereas here could be he's just trying to make them happy. But you could also say, tell them what they want to hear because they want to hear what happened, and you're going to tell them. So I don't know how significant that is. People argued about this as if it was the only confession I don't know, but we'll go on. And maybe the jury is definitive on what he said. There was a lot of talk about how much he loved her. He didn't want her to worry about him, that all he does is worry about her, and let everybody know how much he loves them. He's sorry. He's sorry that he can't help, that he can't do anything to make her feel better. He's sorry. It's just one more thing he effed up for her, and that he'll see her in the next life, and to take care of the family. Now, look, this once again is 2 weeks after he's arrested. I don't want to, as I said, I don't like to get too much into how would you react? How would a guilty person react? How would an innocent person react? And all that stuff, because I think that's the fool's errand. But nevertheless, it's 2 weeks after, and he's already talking like he did this, he's going to be convicted, you'll never see him again. This is certainly not while he's in the depths of his despair in prison, as we're going to see later. This is just when this is all starting.
And that's a really good point, because this is so early in the case that the Odinism theory hadn't come out with the defense yet. It's possible that the defense hasn't even really gone through their discovery yet. He hasn't really seen things. He doesn't really know the case against him. He doesn't know the tactic against him. He just knows what he knows, which is apparently what he's confessing to here. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of the timeline. So fast forward to a call on April 2nd, 2023 to his mother. He says, I've been trying to get a hold of Kathy. And his mom says, weather has been bad. And he then says, if you talk to Kathy, tell her I'm okay. And are you going to church? Because his mom has started going to church. And then Richard Allen starts crying. He says, that's good to hear. Remember, apparently his conversion came in March of 2023. And he asked, did Kathy tell you I accepted the Lord Jesus as my savior? She says, oh, that's wonderful for you. And Richard Allen says, I've got a family that's always going to love me no matter what. We'll all be back together eventually, maybe when we're in heaven. Then he gives a call to his wife the next day, April 3rd, 2023. He says, I want to apologize to you. I did it. You know I did it. I killed Abby and Libby. And she says, no, you didn't. And he says, yes, I did. I don't know why. And she says, no, you didn't. I don't know why you're saying this. You're not feeling well. They've messed up your meds. And he says, maybe I did it. I think I did it. No, you didn't, she says. And he says, is there a way to talk to Brad? They're screwing. No, sorry. She says, is there a way to talk to Brad? They're screwing with you in there. I think I did it. He says again, why would you say that? She says. And he says, because I did it. I want to apologize to the families. So there's a lot of back and forth, essentially him saying, I did it. And her saying, no, no, you didn't. Ping pong back and forth.
And look, the timing here is interesting because he's had this conversion, obviously. Typically, if confessing your sins is one of the things you have to do. And you would think this goes along with that. Now, as we're going to see, he's going to do a lot of confessing, and his family is going to do a lot of pushing back on him. So May 10th, 2023 is another call to his wife. She's on her way to meet Brad Rosie at a gas station for some reason. Not entirely clear what it is. She says that he thinks maybe I've lost my mind. She says we've all lost our minds at this point. He asked, can I trust Baldwin and Rosie? And she said, yes, they're your lawyers. And he says, I need to tell you something. And she says, are you sure you want to do that over the phone? Which, by the way, it is not unusual at all for people to confess and to say incriminating things on a recorded line. We see it all the time. It would blow your mind how often this happens. And, I'm always fast forwarding through the first 5 minutes of the call because it's basically repeating over and over again. This is a recorded line. Everything you say can be used against you. This is a recorded line. So he heard that, and yet he still wants to do this. She's smart enough to say, do you really want to talk about this right now? He says, I need you to know I did this. She says, what? And then she says, there's no way. He says, do you still love you? Or, do you still love me? She says, I still love you, but you haven't done anything. He says, I'm definitely going to lose my mind now. I'm just trying to be at peace with this. I had a dream that I have to let you go, and I have to let you know I did it. She says, you didn't. There's no way. There's no way. The call ends. So this is a repeated thing. He is constantly attempting to confess to various people in his life, seeking reassurance from them that they will still love him, even if he did it. And these people refuse to accept that, he did something like this. Another call to his wife, I think on the same day. He says, I need to know if you still love me. She says, yes, dear. And he says, and everyone else will as well, because I may have to spend the rest of my life here. I just have to know that everyone is still going to love me. It's true, honey. She says, no, it's not. It's true. No, it's not. I just hope you still love me. If I get the electric chair, it's not going to happen. If it does happen, will you be there for me? Which, I mean, I know a lot of people have a very negative view of Richard Allen's wife at this point. I feel so much empathy for her. I can't imagine having a conversation like this and having it multiple times. And now you're talking about whether or not your husband's going to get the electric chair. So she's obviously crying. I mean, she spends most of these calls apparently crying. He says, it's okay, honey. I did it. I killed Abby and Libby. No, you didn't, she says. Stop saying it. He says, I know I should let you go. She says, we're going to be back together. He says, love me no matter what. Will you always love me? She says, please stop talking. And the call ends.
And it doesn't stop there. So in another call to his wife, they start off with a little bit of small talk. And he says that someone has put money in his account and he doesn't know who. And Richard Allen says, I feel like I've lost my mind and gone to hell. And Kathy says, we're all here. And he says, you know that I've done it, right? And she says, I want to have a good conversation. Then Richard Allen complains that no one will talk to him or be honest with him. And they then talk about the chaplain and the chaplain talking to him. On June 11th, 2023, again, he calls his wife and he says, like, well, there's no small talk. They just dive in. I did it. And she says, what? He repeats, I did it. Do you still love me? She responds, yes, dear, but you didn't do it. Why do you say that? Why do you say it? And he says, I don't want to upset you. I'm already upset. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I lost my mind. And she again says, you can't call me and talk this way, okay? And he says, I'm so sorry, baby. Why are you so mad at me? And she responds, I'm not mad. I'm upset. I guess I'm just going to have to stop calling you. I'm sorry. So, at least in his speech, Richard Allen doesn't seem to be under duress. His tone and his cadence doesn't change whether he's talking about the weather or murdering children. The I did it's and the confessions are not like rantings mixed in with a bunch of other things like the government's watching me or, something like that. They all follow a very consistent pattern, and we're hearing the entire call. The entire call is essentially him trying to confess and feeling like he's not heard.
And once again, we haven't heard these calls, so we're going based on the reporting. But I mean, the content is not great. And here's the thing. People they're gonna dive through these calls and try and figure them out. The reason these calls are so bad for the defense, or one of the reasons, remember the immense pressure that's on this jury. The jury is trying to do its level best to decide this case based on, is Richard Allen guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? But they know there's 2 dead girls. They know he's been arrested for it. They know if they acquit him, he's free forever. And they hear him saying he did it over and over and over again. And it is really hard. Very difficult. I wonder how often it happens. It'll be interesting if there are statistics on this, where you have a confession, and not just one where some random guy, like a jailhouse snitch, is saying he told me about it, but you literally hear the man's voice that you're looking at say, I did it, and yet you acquit. I can't imagine that happens that often. So these are incredibly damning for the defense, and I think a lot of people have been hard on the defense for the presentation they have made. They are in a very difficult place. Their client has really put them between a rock and a hard place. And I will tell you, if you're a defense attorney out there, you're nodding your head because you've experienced this. And I've seen it before too, where, we'll have a close case and we're lining up the evidence, or I'll tell you what happens a lot. We have a hung jury. If you have a hung jury, the very first thing you do when you get back to your office is you call somebody and say, pull the jail calls. And you pull the jail calls and you have somebody listen to them. And you would be surprised how often on one of those jail calls that nobody's listened to, they're actually confessing, which then you can use in your next trial. And a lot of times defense attorneys are excited, they're ready to go to trial, and then they're like, hey, got some late discovery, just listen to the jail calls. And you can feel they're like, oh, because they know what that means, right? The jury's going to hear that. It's going to be really hard to convince them otherwise. So in August of 2024, investigators are reviewing Dr. Walla's report. So going back to Dr. Walla. And it includes this detailed confession about this white van. And this detail about the white van stands out to them because they think, like all of us do, that is such a minor thing. If we could confirm that, that would be a big deal. So they go looking for it. They look into reports on the access road. Who lives on the access road? They find Weber. They run Weber and find that he owns a white Econoland van. They look up his work history. They look up when he clocked in and clocked out that day and discover all the things that we've talked about earlier. They look at Google Maps to figure out how long it would take him to get from Subaru to his house. They determined it's about a 25-minute drive. Now, prior to this, there were no reports. There was no discovery. There was nothing mentioning the van. So there's no way that Richard Allen could have known that someone on that road owned a white van that just so happened to be driving by at the time police believe the girls were murdered, and that he says he sees the van. So, and there's no way that Walla could have known about the van. So if you think Walla is somehow feeding this to him because she wants to be a star in the true crime case of the century, there's no way she could have known about the van. The only way you can know about the van is unless you got incredibly lucky with a minor piece of information, or if you were there that day and saw the van, just like Richard Allen says he did.
I mean, this van is really hard to see how Richard Allen is not the person who killed Abby and Libby. It is a hard fact to overcome here. So, of course, you're going to have to cross-examine. And Rosie does the cross-examination, and he brings out with Harshman that there's lots of tips in this case, lots of comparisons. So how could he possibly know that the voice of the bridge guy is Richard Allen's? And he also points out that Harshman only joined in 2020. He then goes on to suggest that maybe Brad Weber was the murderer, not Richard Allen. And then he also, I mean, there's literally nothing. He has a time card too. He's like gone the entire time. Then he asks Harshman, didn't Richard Allen confess to shooting the girls? Which we obviously know is not true. But what comes out is that Allen never said he shot the girls. That was an inmate companion, not from one of the recorded confessions. So it's possible that someone who heard Richard Allen confessing just got the details wrong. And they also disagreed with whether there was any false information in the confessions. Harshman said no, his confessions were all accurate. Any inaccuracies were potentially like a game of telephone, like we've talked about. Now, on redirect, the prosecution played the May 17th, 2023 call. This was between Allen and his mother, and she asks, "How are you?" He responds, "All right, I guess. It's good to hear your voice." Then he asks, "Did Kathy tell you I did it?" Again, jumping straight into it. She responds, "Well, we're not going to discuss this, okay?" And she says, Are you here?" He responds, "I'm still here." And his mom says, "We love you. You know that, don't you? Regardless." "Yes." And he asks, "You know if Kathy is okay?" His mom says, "She is. I've been worried you guys weren't going to love me because I said I did it." And she responds to that with, "You're not in a good place. Just saying it doesn't mean you did it." And he says, "It does when I did it." She then responds, "Don't talk like this. They're just messing with you." And Richard Allen again responds, "No, Mom, they're not. Mom, I wouldn't tell you I did it if I didn't. We're not going to talk about the case," she says. And so he then says, "So if I did do it, you wouldn't love me anymore?" And she responds, "I'll always love you no matter what." Rosie then asks questions about Richard Allen and his behavior in prison. And on redirect, the prosecution wants to play a video with Richard Allen screaming that he's going to kill the guards, etc. But the defense objects, and the video was excluded at that time. Presumably, unless they argue Richard Allen is a peaceful man, it probably won't come up again.
Yeah. And we'll just have to see whether or not at any point they open the door for that. The jury did have some questions here. People generally held in jail or prisons. The answer was jail. Obviously, we know why he ended up being in prison, which, I don't know how much the jury knows that. And it might be worth bringing it up more, especially as we're going to see with the defense case. When was the first phone call confession? April 3rd. How many vans traveled down Weber's driveway? The answer was it's a private drive, so none. So at this point, sort of with mom's call, which I think is a pretty powerful one, the state rests. So the state is now done. And you can make sort of your initial thoughts on this. Remember, the state has the burden to prove Richard Allen's guilty. And I assume at this point, I didn't really read that it happened, but it always happens. The defense would have made an argument for a directed verdict. They essentially would say prosecution hasn't met its burden. That would be denied for several reasons, not the least of which, in this case, you do have a confession, and it's a confession that's corroborated by at least one fact. You can't, typically speaking, you cannot be convicted purely on your confession. You can imagine all sorts of reasons. So just saying, I did it, and that was the only evidence the police had, would not be enough. There has to be something corroborating it. Here, you have the I did it, and you have the van fact, which the prosecution has now put on evidence of. That alone is enough to go to the jury. Even if you didn't have anything else, the fact that you have a corroborated confession is enough. Obviously, you have a lot more than that. I think, and we're going to talk about this later, we got all these confessions. The first week of trial was enough to convict Richard Allen, certainly enough to get to the jury. It's a very low bar. So not surprisingly, assuming that argument was made, which I think it would have been because it would have been malpractice not to, they made the motion for a directed verdict, and that motion was denied. So at this point, the defense now has to start calling their witnesses. And it's been
by the way, you move right into it. I mean,
Yeah,
we
do.
weren't in the courtroom, but in all our trials, you literally have a beat. This is why I say the defense really just has to go. Sometimes you have witnesses waiting, at least one witness waiting in your room for days, just in case this happens.
And this is why you want to stay on good terms with the prosecutor. You don't want to be jerks to the prosecutor, because ideally you're letting them know, like, hey guys, we got 2 more witnesses. We got 2 witnesses tomorrow. We're going to be done. So just want to let you know, right? I mean, we're not trying to trick people here. I don't know what kind of relationship the prosecution has with the defense at this point. So it's been said the defense was kind of surprised that they rested at this point, though obviously it was coming. I mean, we were coming to the end of
They also know what's in
case.
Discovery and
Exactly.
what else there is.
So
this is
they should
obviously
have
the
been
most
ready.
powerful evidence, which is the van. That's what you want to end on.
So they call Cheyenne Mill. She initially was kind of trying to use her notes to testify. You can't do that, so those had to be taken away from her. Her testimony was about the timeline. Now, we know the girls were likely dead by about 2:32. That's the last time Libby's phone moved. Cheyenne parked at the parking lot that afternoon, and she went to the trail with a friend of hers. The problem is, apparently she parked around 2:50, which would be after the girls were dead. She's on the trails at 3:12, and she gets a call from her boyfriend. She sees Shelby Duncan and Daniel Pearson, who were talking on the bridge. I think these 2 people have been mentioned before. She and her friend smoke some cigarettes on the bridge. They walk to the end of the bridge. They step off the trail and relieve themselves. In any event, they don't notice anything. It's not clear why she would, given the established timeline. It's also interesting if you're still thinking about the whole Odinist thing. Like, if there's some sort of Odinist ceremony going down in the trees where multiple people are chanting to their dark gods and sacrificing the girls, you'd think these witnesses would notice something, but apparently they don't. Either way, doesn't seem like she would. They take some pictures, they go home. They don't hear any screaming or anything, which could be significant. The last picture they took was at around 3:55, which was around the time when Sarah Carball is seeing Muddy Bloody Man walking down the street. She would complain that she called the police after she learned the girls were missing to let them know she was on the trail, but they never really got back to her, though it doesn't seem like she really had much to offer. But she was the defense's first witness.
Yep. And the next 2 witnesses are kind of along the same lines, where it's like, they're not going to know anything, and we won't expect them to because of the timeline. So the next witness is Teresa Liebert. Apparently, she was very hard to hear, so I think everyone had a little bit of difficulty reporting what she testified to. But she lives near the Weber residence, which is on the connecting access road, and she's lived there for 48 years. In fact, at one point, the defense had her come up to a map to pinpoint where the Weber residence was, and she couldn't do it. This was like, this happens all the time. This shows you the difficulties that all lawyers face. Here she is being like, I've lived here for 48 years. Can you point it out on the map? I can't. This literally happens to us. The only reason I bring this out is I don't know what it would have helped for her to point it out on a map, but it was a waste of time. It doesn't matter. It kind of this may go to some of the reporting that it seemed like the defense was stumbling around. I don't blame the defense for this. I would also expect her to be able to point it out, but what's the point of pointing it out? Anyways, moving on. On February 13th at about 8:30, she says that she's coming home and she stops at the community mailbox and she sees a stranger near the mailbox. She says that she doesn't really get a good look at him, but she did tell law enforcement what she saw. Obviously, this is like 6 hours before the murders, and I don't think Richard Allen was there at 6 hours earlier, so it's not really clear what the point of this testimony is, except to maybe say that there was someone lurking around 6 hours earlier that could have been the murderer. And she was asked if she remembered some girls knocking on her door at 4:00. She doesn't recall this, and she says that she never sees mailbox man again later or at any time. So again, nothing really comes from her testimony. The next witness is Christopher Goatee. He is with the Hammond Police Department as an officer, and he's also an FBI task force officer. And he did canvass interviews after the Delphi murders, and he canvassed Brad Weber. Apparently, when he spoke to Weber, he said in his report that Weber went home, and he couldn't recall if it was straight home or not. The defense really wanted to recollect his collection. The defense really wanted Christopher Goatee to refresh his recollection with the FBI report he wrote, but he canvassed a lot of people. So he's like, okay, I'll look at the report. He read it. He looked at it. And what you have to do is you can't read from the report because the report is hearsay. What you can do is you can read it, you put it down, and then the attorney has to ask you, does that refresh your recollection? If you say yes, you can testify about it. If you say no, you cannot. And what did he say? He's like, it does not refresh my recollection. I don't remember. I canvassed a lot of people, and that was it. So another witness that literally established nothing.
And here's what's going to happen. It's going to be that at some point, somebody talked to Weber and, it was like, hey, do you remember that day a few weeks ago where nothing happened to you that was significant? And he was like, not really. Did you go home after work? Yeah. Did you stop anywhere? Well, I have an ATM business, so I could have been servicing ATMs. Yeah, I think that's what I was doing. Okay, and they wrote it down and left, right? And then years later, Weber gets called in to the police. He knows he's going to go talk to them about this case. Apparently, he looks through his text messages from that day and realizes that he did service some ATMs, but he did it earlier in the day. So when he talks to him the second time, he's like, yeah, actually, I did go straight home. I did the ATM stuff earlier. And that's what he's going to say. And this is important because of the whole white van thing. Now, the defense, they want the jury to think Weber might have done it, right? Maybe he did it. Now, of course, they don't believe that. They think the Odinist did it. So, nobody actually thinks that Weber did it. This is just like a thing the defense is trying to do to introduce doubt into the jury's mind. I think it's interesting, though, to see Richard Allen's defenders online jump on the Weber did it thing when the police or when the defense doesn't actually believe that. We know what the defense believes happened, and it's not that Weber did it. Weber didn't do it. So you can go ahead and drop that online. We're just trying to get the jury thinking maybe he didn't actually drive that white van by when he needed to.
Yeah, and note that, remember the Teresa Liebert, who lived next to Weber for 48 years, she saw a man. She probably would know someone she said, lived next to for 48 years. She didn't say, I saw a man, and it was Weber. So all of this it's an attempt to just introduce doubt. But I don't think these witnesses have introduced any doubt yet.
And it's always funny to me, and you see this in every single case, every single innocence case. you got the guy who has been charged, where we have all this evidence against him. We're presenting, we have all these witnesses testifying. We got ballistics evidence. We got his own confessions, all this stuff. But there are people who would rather believe it's Weber, who we have no evidence against at all. They would rather think, oh, maybe he did it. It's just, I don't know, like the desire for it to be anybody other than the defendant is one of those things that
until they become the defendant, and then they don't want that to be.
And then it's the Odinist, right? Like if Weber had been arrested, it still would have been the Odinist, or it'd be Ron Logan. It's whoever your like predetermined favorite is, which is, and I'll just say this: I'm all about, there's some of you out there who think innocent till proven guilty means we shouldn't even talk about a case until somebody's convicted. Like we should act like we're the jury. And I'm talking, and I love that. That's great. You're really upholding the principle, but if you can't move off your preconceived notion when you see the evidence, you're not keeping an open mind. You had a closed mind the whole time. So if you weren't sure Richard Allen did it at the beginning, but no amount of evidence is ever going to convince you, you are the closed-minded one. So try and keep an open mind here when you're hearing this evidence come in. So then we have Dr. Diana Dowinger, who was the director for behavioral health in the Indiana Department of Corrections. Now, she never met Richard Allen, but she's going to talk more about sort of general ideas of mental health and how being in solitary can be damaging mentally. The research is split on that, but there's a pretty, there's good research about how being isolated can sort of mess with your head. Now, she did talk about how, though, the primary job is to keep the inmate alive. And that's the primary thing. Then to keep them mentally well. We can't help a dead person, right? And Richard Allen not only threats from inmates, but he also has indicated a desire to harm himself, and that makes it a lot more difficult. She also talked about how much Dr. Walla enjoyed true crime, which was a thing that people knew about. And look, there's no problem with that. There's nothing wrong with her liking true crime. There's nothing wrong with her listening to true crime. There's really nothing wrong with her listening to true crime about Delphi. Should she have been talking to Richard Allen about it? Probably not. Should she have been looking up Keegan Kline's stuff? Definitely not. Like, those are all bad things, but just the idea that she liked true crime isn't necessarily a problem. I bet a lot of people in law enforcement, hey, like true crime. It's a part of our lives, so it's not that surprising. She actually recommended podcasts to the doctor. I wondered whether she recommended ours. I don't know. That didn't come out if she did or not. Now, Dr. Walla, she visited the Mona and High Bridge before she knew she was going to treat Richard Allen, but that's how much she was into this. And look, it's not great. It's definitely something that the defense was right to seize on. I don't know how far it gets them, particularly given the facts in Richard Allen's confessions, but nevertheless, this is good stuff. A lot of what the defense has done has been kind of inexplicable. This makes sense why they would focus on this. Al talked about Haldol, which is medications it is a fast-acting medication that calms people who are in a state of mental distress. So if somebody's having sort of an episode, you can give them Haldol to calm them down. Now, it doesn't last very long. It passes out of your system fairly quickly. I think, the defense has been trying to present Haldol as this sort of like, you give it to Richard Allen, and all of a sudden he's a different person. He's basically been a different person the whole time he's in prison. So maybe that's why he's been confessing. Who knows? So there were a bunch of jury questions, many of which were very helpful to the prosecution. We talked about safe keepers, what those people are. Are they in general population? They can be. They asked, could it be that Richard Allen was faking symptoms to avoid being moved to general population? She said, yes, she had seen that. I don't know that Richard Allen ever would have been in general population, no matter what, since he is just being held at the prison in lieu of a jail. So I don't know if they would have moved him there, but maybe they would have. I don't know. She'd never treated him. Talked about when you're faking a mental health issue, or even when you're in the grips of some sort of psychosis, can truth slip out? And this was something she spent a lot of time on. She said yes. And she said, look, people in psychosis can be telling the truth. Just because you're in a psychosis doesn't mean you're lying. She asked, what would that look like? And she said, their body language, that sort of thing. You can look at those things, but really look at what they're saying. Is what they're saying, is it being told in an orderly way? Is it being told in a chronological order? Is it a linear story? Does one thing follow after another? Are there things in it that you can verify? Those sort of things. Or is it disjointed and all over the place? Does it have organization? Does it have logic, etc.? This is really bad for Richard Allen because his confessions do not sound like rantings and ravings. They do not sound like that. Whether you think they're true or not, he's not doing that. He is telling a coherent story when he's talking to people. She also talked about psychotic episodes often have themes. There's a persecutory theme. People are out to get me. They're listening to me. There's hypersexuality. I'm God's gift to women. Hyper-religiosity. I am the son of God and the son, and probably God's gift to women at the same time. Extreme jealousy, command. You hear voices in your head telling you to do something. None of this really fits Richard Allen. It doesn't seem. In general, her testimony, and remember, she's a defense witness, is pretty bad for Richard Allen, all told.
I honestly forgot she was a defense witness because the jury questions, first of all, again, showed how much the jury is listening. And also it seems to be a pretty educated jury population in terms of knowing the questions to ask. But it was the jury questions, I think, that really brought out the pro-prosecution testimony from this witness. So during a break on Friday, Richard Allen apparently, this is reported by the murder sheet, but apparently while they were on break, Kevin noticed that Richard Allen was staring and pointing at him and Anya. And then he was like talking to Rosie while pointing to them. I have no idea, why he's doing that. Apparently he's done that to multiple people in the courtroom. Honestly, there's like 3 weeks. You could be looking at everyone and you certainly know who's probably not on your side and making, podcasts about it. So it doesn't surprise me that much that he would know that. But I think it also shows that he's aware of what's happening in the courtroom. He's not sitting there sedated. He's not sitting there, completely checked out. We have defendants who did that. But I don't remember. I don't know. We didn't do this trial together, but I did a trial where the defendant, he was a white collar defendant, but it was a over a month-long trial, and he wore the same 2 sweaters on alternating days. It was like a green sweater and a red sweater and a green sweater and a red sweater and a green, I don't know why. It was like he had lots of clothes because I've seen him in lots of other hearings. He had suits. He had quite the closet, but every day he just wore it was like Mr. Rogers. And he would like make jokes about his sweater every single day. Anyways, I just point that out in that I don't think it's that weird that he's talking to his attorneys and maybe even taking note as to who is in the gallery because he knows this is a highly publicized trial. Okay, the next witness on Friday was Max Baker, who was an intern for defense attorney Rosie. He's the one who listened to Richard Allen's phone calls and watched the videos, and he put together a tape of Richard Allen's time at the Westville Correctional Center. Now, this was objected to by the prosecution, and the in-cell footage right now is out. Some of the footage that was taken with a camcorder can be used without audio, and it's from April to July of 2023. So they have to figure out if they can do that, but I think on Friday, at least, they couldn't figure out what dates these videos were actually taken, which is a problem. I think they ultimately figured it out today. But this just shows you have to be prepared for everything. It's wonderful to come up with your stitched together TikTok videos. But I think the judge literally asked, how do you know these are from the relevant timeline? And they're like, it's labeled. And they're like, who labeled it? I did. Not great. This is, by the way, why chain of custody and knowing where all your things are from dated is important.
It's always fun when the defense has to get evidence in. It's like, you guys have been giving us a hassle this whole time.
Yep.
Now we're going to hassle you. How do you know what date that was on? How do we know you didn't switch out the video? So anyways, yeah, they eventually figured that out. That wasn't the last witness on Friday. There was also Brad Heath, who is, I believe, 70 years old. He drove from Delphi to Logansport on a route every day as a service guy. He's driving through on the 13th, and he sees a vehicle parked on the street at around 8:45 a.m. He sees it later in the afternoon. It was a dark blue, older vehicle. He thought it was out of place. It reminded him of a car from the movie The Fugitive. Doesn't not that significant. I mean, we talked about this before. In every innocence case, you see this too. There's always like the mysterious vehicle parked on the street. Witnesses said they saw a car driving through the street. It's like, okay. But, the presumption is that was the killer in the blue car, right? It's not the man in the white van. It's the dude hanging out at the postal box or the guy in the blue car or whatever. But in any event, once again, this was 8:45 a.m., so it doesn't seem all that relevant. And I would just say this. I don't know why the defense is calling all these people. I don't know if they need more time to get to something. You never want to waste the jury's time. You particularly don't want to waste their time when they are stuck in a hotel. So the defense really needs to move this along and get to their point if they have one. Next, they had a photographer, didn't catch his name. He's 78, likes going on the trails. He said you can see rocks in the stream from the bridge, which I guess means you probably could see fish, which is one of the things Richard Allen said he did. He was there at around 3:15. He left around 4. He saw, I believe, Libby's dad looking for the kids. They asked him if he'd seen some girls. He hadn't seen them, and he didn't really see anything, and he left.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why the defense is calling these witnesses. You also, like we said, you don't know what witnesses will say when they're on the stand. So sometimes you just got to take a shot and see if someone will be like, you know what? Previously, I said it was 8:30 a.m. I saw that weird man. It was actually 2:30. So sometimes you just got to take those shots. But what I think is really coming across in all these defense witnesses is there's a reason the defense wants to change the timeline. They can find people to talk about things anywhere but the actual timeline. And guess what? Everyone, I think, and I think the reason they can't find anyone to talk about seeing something else that may cut in their favor during the timeline of the murders is because we've heard from all of them in the prosecution's case in chief, and all of them saw Bridge Guy. That's the problem, right? So they are in a rock and a hard place here, but I think that is what's so stark for me in the 2.5 days of defense testimony is, yeah, they have to have people before the murders and after the murders because everyone who was there during the murders saw Bridge Guy, and Richard Allen said essentially he's Bridge Guy, and he's confessed. Again, you're dealt the hand that you're dealt here. So I don't know about you guys, but that's what I'm hearing like loud and clear right now from their witnesses. Now, the next witness is Daryl Sterrett, who is a volunteer fireman. And he talks about the search, but he didn't find anything. So that's all. I don't mean to be short shrift about that, but I guess the point of this witness is to show like maybe there's a world in which the girls weren't there and they had to be moved there later. It's not clear from his testimony, but he doesn't have to make the argument. Then it gives, I guess, the defense an opening to be able to argue this on cross. Like this volunteer fireman who searches all the time couldn't find them. Is it because he's bad at searching, or maybe they weren't even there? So, but that's not what he said. All he said was, I searched. And by the way, so did like hundreds of people for a day, and no one found anything until the girls were found. So the next person was Steve Mullen, who you remember previously testified. He's called back, and he talks about preserving evidence. He talks about the taped over interviews. Remember how there's a lot of interviews in this case, especially before an arrest was made, and not all of the investigative interviews were saved. This is a good hit for the defense. They suggested that it was strange that police recorded the Brad Weber interview, but not the phone call setting up the interview. And that even though they've tested the bullet, they didn't go through Weber's gun. Now, to the extent there were inconsistencies with Brad Weber, he looked at texts which confirmed that he did actually go home that day. So what Brett said earlier, where maybe at the time he's like, well, there's a possibility, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, maybe I went somewhere else before I went home. When he went back and looked at like his own hard evidence, he's like, no, I just went straight home. So this again is the defense just trying to insert doubt. Again, the defense doesn't even think Brad Weber did it. This is just to try and insert some sort of confusion, muddy the waters for their case.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I don't really get the point. There's nothing wrong with him looking back at actual data to try and figure out what he did that day, as opposed to rely on his memory. That's why we refresh people's recollection, is because you want you want the truth. You want the real answer. And the best way to do that is to look at some, hard thing, like the lady on the bridge where she's the first defense witness. How does she know what time she was on the bridge? She got a call from her boyfriend. So it's the same type of thing. You're just looking to see your timing. So, I mean, I get what they're trying to do, and maybe it'll be successful, maybe it won't, but it doesn't move me, I have to say.
Is he? I did.
I mean, I can talk about Tobe Lesenby. He didn't really do
Oh,
anything.
sorry. Okay. Tobe Lesenby, sorry. Missed that. He is a very important man. So Tobe Lesenby is called, and even though we all know his name from following all the press of Delphi over the past several years, he actually had a really small role in the actual investigation of this case. He's more the public face in making announcements about the case. So honestly, not much came out about anything with respect to the investigation.
So that was the end of Friday, and then Saturday was mostly showing the tapes. They got the tapes together, got the dates right, of Richard Allen while he was incarcerated. Now, these tapes were not shown to the public, only to the jury. The defense team, who didn't think it was a big deal when they leaked crime scene photos of the girls to the public, were very concerned about preserving Allen's dignity with the videos. And whatever, that's their prerogative. If they want to ask for it and the judge wants to give it to them, so be it. There were a lot of people who are upset about that. Thought that, if photographs of the girls are fair game for the gallery, then so too should be the video. And I mean, I kind of agree with that. I mean, as we've often said, you try and protect people's privacy as much as possible. When you get to trial, that's sort of out the window. As much as I would like to protect the girls, I don't know that it would have been appropriate, for instance, for no one in the gallery to have been able to see the photographs of the crime scene and the wounds, because I think those are things that are very important when it comes to the trial. And remember, you have a right as a defendant to an open trial. That's your constitutional right. And part of that is having some sort of open presentation of the evidence. Now, post-trial, we certainly can have protective orders that prevent, those photographs and this video from being just on YouTube for anybody to see. I think there's a distinction there. But part of testing the evidence, I think, is the public has some sort of right to access. And generally speaking, the way you satisfy that right is in the public trial. So I don't know. But in any event, this was the decision made by Judge Gold, who, as we all know, always rules for the prosecution and is totally in the bag for them. And yet here, definitely was ruling in favor of the defense. I don't think the prosecution thought this should come in at all. I think they had an argument for excluding it, but I think because of the confessions, I don't know that you can keep it out. If you had no confessions, I don't think this comes in at all. Then it's completely irrelevant. But I think the confessions, it has to come in. We have no idea what was shown. There were people who said it was shocking, or it appeared to be shocking based on, the way the lawyer was responding, who obviously was doing a little acting, and maybe some of the jurors. We just don't know. We don't know how it plays. We don't know if people are horrified because they're like, wow, look at that. There's that murderer doing murdery things. For all we know, that could be the response, or they're horrified because they feel sorry for Richard Allen, or they're horrified because this makes them not believe the confessions, or if they're just generally horrified to see somebody acting that way, but it won't have any effect on their decisions at all. We don't know. So at this point, all we can say is that this is Richard Allen's big hope. I mean, based on the defense case we've heard so far, there hasn't been a lot to it. The main thrust is this. Richard Allen was, I think in opening statement, there was some statement that he was treated like a POW, which the defense better hope that nobody on that jury has a relative who was actually a POW, because they didn't get tablets in the Hanoi Hilton, and it's insulting to even say that, but that is sort of their take, and this is backing that up. So I guess we'll see. Getting the jury to sympathize with a man who's accused of killing two people is hard. That is what they're going for. I mean, it is a Hail Mary, because you basically have to hope that they will ignore all the other evidence because he was treated poorly while incarcerated.
I'll say, usually when you try to garner sympathy for someone charged with a gruesome murder like this, is what we talked about earlier. The whole, he's a man of God. He is a loving father. He's a, you know, a person in community that everyone looks to, rather than these videos. And this is hard. They're in a hard place because we've heard a lot of testimony where we've already heard his voice, where he seems to not be in midst of psychosis, where people have said, anyone who doesn't eat for several days is going to act crazy, whether you are crazy or not. And you can force yourself not to eat, but then also eat the fourth meal because you know that skipping a fourth meal is going to trigger, additional response from the prison. So even though they are seeing these videos, again, we don't know what they are of and how it's hitting with the jury. They're not seeing it absent any sort of background. They've been hearing testimony about his actions in prison, and the people who've treated him have said that they think, at least at some points, he is malingering or acting out in a way to, I guess, put on a show.
He also had a sticky note today. So there's that. Back to his paper diet. He's back on that. Don't really know what was going on there, but even when held in jail, apparently he likes to eat paper. So they show these videos. There may be more.
Real quick on that. I mean, obviously we were not there. I don't know. I kind of got angry at the eating a sticky note thing because it feels completely for show for the jury. But whatever. I wasn't in the courtroom today. If I were the prosecution, I would probably use that to my advantage and say, he's sitting here unshackled with his family members in regular clothing, and they're claiming like this is all a show. All of this is a show, and things are going so bad, essentially, that like he has to eat a sticky note to try and garner sympathy. I mean, it is just, especially with all that we are seeing the defense do and all that we have heard so much about the gruesomeness of this murder or these murders. For some reason, him eating the sticky note today just made me angry. I've kept my emotions out of today's show so far, but for some reason, that act angered me today.
So Doug Carter also testified. We had Tobe Lesby. We've had sort of all the famous people. He primarily was there to talk about the FBI. The FBI left the case in August of 2021. It was Carter's decision, and that was pretty much it. He returned the investigative documents, or they returned the investigative documents, and we're out of the case. Didn't really go into why. This has been sort of a thing the defense has hinted at, that this is somehow nefarious, that the FBI wasn't involved. I will tell you, I've been on a lot of multi-agency task forces before. The FBI has a lot of great resources. I can imagine in the beginning, it was very helpful to have them. You can do some like behavioral analysis stuff. You can use their manpower. By 2021, this investigation had been going on for 4 years. At that point, I don't imagine the FBI had a very major role at that point. They probably had like one agent who was doing some time on this. And I could imagine them, as they're sort of reorganizing this task force, which they did multiple times, just sort of streamlining things and getting it down to their people. And thanks for your help, FBI. I don't know why this would be a negative thing that the locals would want to handle a state matter at this point.
And just so you know, for like, boring law enforcement administrative stuff, almost every law enforcement agency, certainly the FBI, we all have to do case reviews every several months where you essentially have to say like what's being done in a case, why is this case still open, because you want cases to move along. You don't want things to fall between the cracks. And so when it's not your lead case, if you are helping and it's 4 or 5 years later and the case is still technically open on your file, like it shows as a metric that a case continues to be open, and they want to know how to allocate resources, both money and investigators. And if you report this case is still on our docket, it's still open, no, there's nothing they're waiting for. We're not waiting on testing. We're not helping with canvassing. There's no additional interviews. We're kind of just waiting because it's an open, unsolved case. Okay, well, if they don't need us, then let's close it out, because then we don't have to allocate resources to it. If something's open, it literally is just an administrative thing that law enforcement has to keep track of. So you can imagine that this actually happens all the time. We can always reopen cases, but we often close out cases when there's nothing for that law enforcement agency to do. Otherwise, administratively, it becomes a real burden. And that's when cases fall between the cracks. When you have too many cases open and it looks like we have to allocate all these resources to these 1,000 cases that nothing's happening in, and then we lose sight of the cases that are active.
And let me just also say, state and local agencies don't really like working with the feds. I mean, they just don't. We do it a lot. We value our state and local partners, of course. We love them. But they view things differently. There are all sorts of reasons this might have happened. Almost none of them are nefarious. In fact, it doesn't even make any sense. I mean, this was August of 2021. They didn't make an arrest until October of 2022. They didn't know about Richard Allen for another year. Like, what would be the big thing going on here at this time? I think there's all sorts of reasons. As Alice was talking about, justifying the resources. I could imagine Doug Carter having to write a memo every couple months explaining to the local FBI why he needs this agent. And maybe just being like, you know what, I'm tired of writing a memo. Thanks, guys.
He actually, you're totally right. He probably actually had to do that. And it's annoying. Like every case that's open on your docket takes, like you have to do case reviews where you have to sit down and talk to someone. An open case that doesn't need to be reported on takes 5 minutes of your life every few months. When you have like a ton of cases, that's a lot.
And look, once again, the FBI is just there to help. This is not their case. They have no jurisdiction. It's not a federal crime. There is a kidnapping. So at the beginning, there might have been a federal hook. We found the girls there. So there is no federal hook. So it just doesn't surprise me. So we've already spent more time talking about it than they did in court today. Yeah. So I know this has been sort of a source of, the FBI is so mysterious. Like, wow, what's going on?
Focusing on the wrong things. Think something boring, administrative.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably what it is. So we've come to the end of the testimony for this week. Most likely there'll be a verdict next week or early week after that. By then, it may just be me for a little while. So you guys are going to put up with me by myself. We'll have to see how that goes. I do want to say one thing before we sign off and before we lose Alice. And that's about the confessions, because I keep seeing people say something and I don't really even understand. I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand why you're saying it, which is, if there are no confessions, would there be enough in this case? And I feel like you're looking at this completely wrong. I understand you're trying to say, is there enough to convict him without the confessions? But I feel like you've already gone down the wrong path at that point. The confessions are part of this case. They're part of this case no matter what. They're part of this case whether you believe them or don't believe them. And you can't look at individual pieces of evidence and just say to yourself, well, I'm looking at this confession. Do I believe this confession is legitimate or not? I'm going to say I don't believe this one. Now I'm going to move to confession 2. Do I think this confession is legitimate or not? I don't know. You can't do that. And the reason you can't do that is because when you're looking at the evidence, you have to look at it in a holistic view. You don't know. I don't know whether or not these confessions are legitimate. I don't know whether or not they are the product of psychosis. I don't know if Richard Allen is making them up, and neither do you. And so just because you have heard this and you're like, I don't know, I think maybe these are made up. Okay, fine. That is not the best way to analyze them. The best way to analyze them is in their totality. So you have a man who put himself on the trails at the time the girls were murdered, who was seen by other people who identified Bridge Guy, who says he's dressed like Bridge Guy, whose bullet was found at the trails, whose car is caught on video driving to the trails, who says that he was spooked by a white van that was arriving at the trails at that time, and then says he killed the girls in multiple different confessions. Those are all facts you have to consider together. And if you want to discount the confessions, you cannot do it on the confessions alone. You have to do it in the light of all the other evidence. So thinking about it in that bifurcated way, I think you've already started down the wrong path, and you've set yourself up not to have a good analysis of the evidence that is in front of you.
Amen. And when looking at the totality of the evidence, you're evaluating the confessions like you do all the other evidence. If these were all ravings of a madman that made no sense and it had no details that were consistent with the crime scene, it's part of the evidence, but certainly doesn't point to guilt. But look at the nature of his confessions as well. There's nothing in the rules of evidence that say you discount their own confessions. You may have reasons, maybe you're buying into some of the cross-examination or some of the defense testimony that there's some reason you shouldn't believe it. But note that the defense isn't even arguing, don't listen to the confessions. They're trying to discount them because they absolutely are part of the case. The defense is not saying, well, they're just blowing a bunch of smoke. You can't listen to this. That's not what they're saying. Listen to what their cross-examination is saying. Listen to what their defense testimony is. They're trying to say, don't give this as much weight, because that's what the jury's supposed to do. Weight all the different evidence. It's like when we talk about circumstantial and direct evidence. You don't just say, well, what is the direct evidence case without looking at any of the circumstantial, or what's just the circumstantial evidence. It's all evidence. And the jury, that's why they sit in the courtroom and they listen and see the mannerisms in which the witnesses are testifying, and they determine the credibility of what they are hearing, because all of it's evidence. Imagine it on a table, and they have to determine how much weight to put on each of it, what to believe, how to believe it, and whether it's consistent with each other. So be a smart observer of the evidence, and that's the way to do it. That's what the jurors are going to be instructed to do. That's what you're supposed to do. This is what you do in real life as well. Think about how you make decisions in real life. You don't go outside, using the rain example. You don't go outside and say, okay, so take away the fact that water is falling from the sky. Convince me that it's raining right now. Okay, I see umbrellas up, and I see that the news right now is currently reporting that it's raining, and there's water from the sky, but discount the fact that water's coming from the sky. No, water coming from the sky is absolutely a part of you determining whether it's raining outside. And this is what you do in the courtroom. When you walk into the courtroom, what does the judge and what do the attorneys tell you to do? You don't check your rational thinking at the door. You don't stop the way you normally think about life, how you make decisions, how you determine what is right or wrong or true or not true when you walk into a courtroom. I think a lot of people forget that. The courtroom is supposed to symbolize the rest of our world. That's why it's a jury of your peers. It's not a jury of people with suspended realities. It is truly supposed to be the standard of a reasonable person who's lived life in this world that follows kind of the rules of society and the rules of physics that we all follow. When you walk into that courtroom, that doesn't get checked at the door. So in real life, if you're at the office and a stapler is missing and you catch your coworker, Bob, on security camera taking the stapler, and then Bob says, hey, I stole your stapler. Do you count the fact that you saw him on camera and he said, I stole your stapler, as all part of the evidence of being like, yeah, you stole my stapler? Yeah, you take that into consideration. Do that here as well. Don't check common sense at the door. I don't think the jurors are either, because I think they're asking questions that show they're thinking about the totality of the circumstances. But I also think we're going to find out pretty soon what they think.
And Alice, uses great examples as always. And I really like the rain one. You can imagine a scenario where you're watching television and they're telling you on the television it's raining. And you look out the window and you see somebody walk by with an umbrella. And you might say to yourself, a similar circumstance is, well, what if you didn't see that person with the umbrella? I mean, are you just going to take the weatherman's word for it? You're just going to assume that he's right? It's like, what? I did see the person with the umbrella. And because I saw the person with the umbrella, I have a reason to believe what the weatherman is saying. That is very similar to confessions. We believe confessions not just because the words are coming out of someone's mouth, but because of all the other evidence around it. And the defense very much wants you to separate those out, because they don't want you to think about the fact that the guy who's confessing to doing it also did all these other things. In some ways, the confessions, if played right, are almost helpful, because the jury, they're so focused on the confessions that maybe they forget about all the evidence. Now, this prosecution's done a good job making sure that didn't happen, but maybe they forget about all the evidence, and you can get them in a place where the only question they ask when they go back in the jury room is, do I believe the confession or not? We talked about this with a witness testifying, with a defendant testifying, that a lot of times everybody's so focused on the defendant testifying and was he believable? Was he not believable? We saw this in Murdaugh, that if we can just convince the jury he's believable, well, then maybe they'll quit, because they'll forget about all the other evidence that showed he was guilty. And I think that's right now the defense's best path, is to try and, through these videos, show that there was reason to doubt the confessions. Ignore the man behind the curtain. Since you have reasons to doubt the confessions, Therefore, he's not guilty.
And kind of, I know we have another week to go, but stepping back and looking at 3 weeks of evidence with the prosecution having rested and the defense, getting started and I think probably ending soon. If not for the media circus that has occurred, this honestly is a very boring case. There are so many cases like this. There are so many cases like this. I wish that were not true, but they happen every single day. No one pays attention to these trials because there's so many of them. They are personal, of course, to the victims and the victims' families, but this is not an extraordinary case. The evidence in this case is not extraordinary. The way he's acting in jail is not extraordinary. His 60 plus confessions is not extraordinary, except for the fact that he's going to trial. I'm still shocked he's going to trial because this case in 99.9% of other situations would have pled out. It is a strong case the prosecution has put forward. The defense's cross-examinations, look, they've done the job they're supposed to do. Their cross-examinations and the witnesses they've put up so far have done nothing to dent a very clear, very airtight, very strong evidentiary story that meets all the elements of double homicide.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. We'll see what happens in the next week. I mean, maybe they throw a Hail Mary, but once again, that is not what defense cases typically do. It's very rare that you see a Hail Mary. We covered the
we know what the Hail Mary was. They're continuing to try it. It's the Odinist theory. And look, that's a heck of a Hail Mary, but they're not allowed to present it, as they shouldn't, because there's no evidence tying it to it.
It's kind of funny because if you let them do it now, they've already put on all these witnesses who basically said,
Brad Weber.
We didn't hear see anything. It's like, wait, if you didn't hear or see anything, how was there an Odinist cult thing going on down there? But look, I don't know. If it had been me, I would have put on some bullet person. I would have got someone who's actually a ballistics expert, not a metallurgist, which is who they tried to do.
Mm-hmm.
I would have gotten that person. I would have shown the videos. I would have gotten a psychiatrist to talk about how they examined Richard Allen, and he's going through all sorts of things, and he could say anything, and I would have rested. I wouldn't have put on all these people that they put on. That's how I would have done it. That's not what they're doing. That's why they get paid the big bucks. Like I said, we'll see what happens. I expect we'll have closing arguments. I will be shocked if we don't have closing arguments by Wednesday. I mean, I think that's giving them a lot. 2 more days.
I know, because they've been having long trial days as well. So that's a lot of hours to fill when these witnesses are going. And there's not a lot of cross-examination or jury questions because there's just not a lot of substance to ask any questions about.
And we'll see if the family testifies. I mean, the daughter thing is awkward and out there,
And it's fair game to ask about.
Do you put her on the stand to say he never did that? Do you do that? And if you don't, is a jury saying to themselves, well, they didn't put her on? I mean, that's a delicate place. And I do not envy her. I don't envy any of his family. And there are a lot of victims in this case. And like I said, I know people have been very critical of them, but it is difficult to put yourself in the place of being the mother or the wife of someone who's accused of doing something like this. So,
let's focus
a little
on
bit of
the person who's charged.
Exactly. Focus on the person. Direct your ire at them. If you're going to be mad at somebody, be mad at them. Okay, Alice, we've been going a while. I don't think I have anything else. Do you have anything else?
No. I hope this was helpful, everyone. And there are other sources, obviously, of people who are in the courtroom. Go listen to them. But hopefully this helps you see it from, folks who've been in the trenches. And I really hope this comes to a close tomorrow, because like I said, this case is unfortunately unextraordinary from an evidentiary point of view. It's extraordinary whenever there's a horrific murder. And I truly wish that Abby and Libby and their families did not have to live through this media circus, because this just happens sometimes with cases. I don't know why they hit lightning, but this one did. But now that we've heard really, I think most of the evidence, it's not a difficult case and it's not an extraordinary case. So I do hope there's closure very, very soon for everyone involved.
I agree 100%.
With that, Brett, I always love recording with you on a Saturday night. Seriously, this is always really fun to be with all of you. Thank you for showing up and for listening. And we'll see what happens next week on a lot of fronts. Until next time, I'm Alice.
I was about to say, you gonna say
That was my turn. It's my turn. Totally my turn. I was like, come on, Brett. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.